Well, welcome to another Friday night. If you were to try to summarize the work that I do, it's big picture to really help people understand complex trauma in detail, where it comes from and how it affects their life. But a key component in understanding that is to understand the shame piece. And that's been a big part of what my work has been about, is helping people understand that the major issue coming out of complex trauma is it shapes our identity negatively, and we call that shame, and that affects every aspect of life. And one of the things that we realize is that complex trauma mainly takes place within the family, but it's also influenced by the culture. The culture can create complex trauma as well. And so what I want to do this evening is to look at shame cultures. Now, a lot of people are going to get nervous and think I'm just going to blast other cultures. So let me begin by really saying this, that over the last 30 years, I have spent much of my time deconstructing Western culture and pointing out what is unhealthy in Western culture. And so by me pointing out what is unhealthy in other cultures, it's not me saying Western culture is perfect, other cultures are unhealthy. This is me saying if we're going to get healthy as people, we have to deconstruct our culture. And so I've deconstructed Western culture, and people have often even criticized me that I'm too critical of Western culture, but there's a lot of unhealthy stuff in Western culture. And so now why I'm doing this video is because over the last year, as our YouTube channel has grown and grown, we now have people from over 50 countries in the world who are watching our videos. And in our online Lift program, we have people from over 30 countries of the world who are taking that program. And I get asked regularly to help them deconstruct their culture. And many come out of what is known as shame cultures. And so the purpose of this video is not to gang up on shame culture and say it's terrible and Western culture is good. No, the purpose of this video is to help people from shame cultures deconstruct their own culture so they can see what is unhealthy. They can see how it's influenced them, how it's produced some complex trauma, and what needs to change if they're going to get healthy. And so the whole goal is to help people get healthy. It's not to pick on a particular culture. Having said all of that, so there are certain cultures in the world that are known as shame cultures. But in Western culture, there is a shame culture element. And both my wife and I grew up with lots of typical Western culture things, but coming to realize there was a shame culture piece that we also had to deal with. And so to talk about shame cultures is to really talk about a spectrum. There's the extreme shame cultures, but almost every culture has some element of shame culture characteristics. And so it's really to help you begin to understand what those look like, how they affect you, so that you can get healthy. Another important piece, I think, to understand this is that when you look at complex trauma families that are kind of in the extreme end of creating complex trauma, those are basically miniature shame cultures. Within that home is a shame culture. And so what we're talking about then is when you get all the homes in a culture who are operating by shame culture, then you end up with a shame culture. The bottom line is this, and many people are going to struggle with me saying this, but it's that a shame culture has much about it that isn't healthy, just like Western culture has much about it that isn't healthy. To just adhere to a shame culture is not going to produce a healthy person. That's the bottom line. And I would say the same about the West. To adhere to a Western style of thinking will not produce healthy. So again, this is not slamming cultures. This is just deconstructing cultures and honestly seeing what is not healthy. And shame cultures ultimately prevent true happiness. It's important to say, to balance that many within shame cultures have wonderful intentions for their children. They want to create honorable citizens. They want to keep their children on the straight and narrow so that they don't get off into terrible lifestyles. That's not the issue, is not their intention. The issue is the tools they're using to try to achieve that intention. Those are the shame culture tools, and what I want people to see is that those tools ultimately backfire. They do not produce the entire desired intent. Having said that, let me just kind of give you a big picture, and then we're going to slowly work into understanding this topic. And I really hope it just sheds a whole lot of light either on your culture or your upbringing and gives you a deeper understanding of both complex trauma and shame. So a shame-based family, we'll start with that. It begins with a person in authority who has lots of shame. And now they use their authority not to do what's best for the children, not to do what's best for the family, but to do really two things. Number one, to make themselves look good and to get what they want. So they want to cover their shame, make themselves look good, and they want to get what they want, so it's narcissistic. So that shame-based culture within a home begins with a shame-based person in authority. And so you can see if you get enough of those kind of families together and they're all living the same way and all of the authority figures are shame-based, you end up creating a shame-based culture. So the priority is hiding shame or looking good and that the authorities get what they want. It feeds a narcissism. But in that culture, they don't call it hiding shame or feeding narcissism. They call it honor. And so it's an honor society is how they would describe it. But what I want you to see, it's truly about a shame, covering shame, getting what you want. So how they do that in this authority position is they create all kinds of rules about what looks honorable, what will make the leader look good because the family looks good. They aren't about truly what is loving. That's not the main priority, though that's a priority. The main priority is about looking good, hiding shame. And so it becomes a culture with thousands of rules. Rules about everything, many spoken, many unspoken, but if you grow up in that culture, you just begin to know the thousands of different rules. And each rule, if you keep it, then makes you superior, makes you honorable. It gives you status, it gives you respect. And so keeping these thousands of rules is what it's all about. So you have rules about what you wear. And then there's value attached to how you dress. So many of you grew up hearing that. You're going to this event, you can't wear jeans. That would be disrespectful. Or if a girl doesn't wear a dress but wears jeans, she's being slutty. That's a shame-based, rule-driven. Now your value comes from what you wear. So they do that all the time. Or if you wear your ball cap at this, you're not being respectful. So everything is external respect by keeping rules. And so what you see is that everything is about keeping external rules. It's not about internal attitudes, it's external rules. And so that goes to what you wear, how you talk, and we're going to talk more about that. Even how you walk becomes important. Then there's rules about amount of makeup a woman can wear, tattoos, piercings, etc., etc. So rules about behavior determine whether you're honorable or not. Now you see, none of those have anything to do with love. Somebody's just created this arbitrary system that is to them a determinant of are you being honorable or not. Then they attach value not just whether you keep the rules, but now value gets attached to possessions, to your car, to your house, to the neighborhood you live in, to the school you went to. Everything now places you as more superior to others or inferior to others. So behavior and externals aren't about right or wrong or what is loving. Behaviors and externals are about determining whether you're superior to others or inferior. And so honor is really superior inferiority and where you are on that spectrum. And so what has happened then is a shame-based leader has created all these rules. Others have bought into these rules. And over time, those rules and that thinking take over the culture. And everybody in the society begins to adopt them. And that is a shame-based society. So the rules are intended to give you a map to how to be great, how to be superior to others. But what I hope you see is that all of life now has become a competition. It's about proving you're better than somebody else. You're superior. In other words, it's all about compensating for shame, hiding shame. That is the bottom line basis of all of that. Now, again, having said that, that's their main priority, to hide shame. That doesn't mean they don't have other priorities. They still want to be loving. And they can act very loving to their children, but they need their children to keep the rules so that they look good. And so how do they enforce that? They now use fear as the main way of controlling and motivating. All of a sudden then, love is no longer unconditional. Love is now conditional. I will love you if you keep the rules, if you submit, if you conform. But if you break the rules, if you don't make me look good, then I will shun you. So love now is still a desire, but it is now conditional on whether or not you meet the greater priority of making me look good, of being honorable. These families also still desire connection and closeness within their families, but there's still that higher priority of hiding their shame, of getting what they want. And so, at some point, it will get in the way of true, meaningful, healthy connection. And so they have all the right other priorities. The problem is they get distorted by this higher priority of hiding shame. And everything now is subjected to that priority, and it distorts it. And that is what happens in shame culture. So shame cultures practice many good virtues, but what you begin to see is they are getting distorted. They're doing them for the wrong reasons. I want you to be a good kid, not because it's good for you, but because it makes me look good. It makes us look good. So they are nice to other people. Why? So others will respect them. So they're giving in order to get. All of their kind acts, all of their wonderful things that they do, all have a hidden self-serving agenda to make me look good. And so again, everything starts to get distorted. Every good virtue, kindness to others, all has hidden agendas, self-serving agendas. They are getting distorted. It's important to see, I think, that when you look at shame cultures, there's a spectrum. So the longer a shame culture exists, usually it progresses more and more towards narcissistic stuff because it actually feeds shame. It's trying to solve shame, but it's actually feeding shame. And so it just gets more and more extreme. And so as it progresses, more rules are created. And then if you break those rules and make the leaders look bad, the consequences are enforced with greater severity. They're more extreme in their consequences. And then the leader gets to the point where they can never be wrong. They can never look bad. And if anything goes wrong, it's always somebody else's fault. They must feel in total control. Any challenge of their authority, any lack of submission is wrong. And so authority, submission are such important themes. And often they bring in religion to try and support their rules, to support their authority. And so religion gets used as a weapon to enforce what they want. But what I hope you begin to see is that the system will always backfire. It never achieves what it desires. And so it desires respect. It desires that people turn out well. It desires connection. It desires close families. But the very priorities that are the greatest priorities prevent that from happening. If you take respect, they make rules then. You have to respect the leader. So they make rules about that. So now when the leader comes, you got to bow. You got to take your hat off. You got to give them your seat. All these external rules that show respect. But what is actually happening? That's an external behavior. Does the person actually respect them in their internal attitude? They may hate the person. They may see the person as a total narcissist, psychopath, womanizer, misogynist, whatever, and they may have zero respect for them, but they do the right actions. And so the leader now walks into a room and everybody bows to them and gives up their seat and all of those things, and they go, they're acting like they respect me, but do they really respect me? How do I know that? Ultimately, what happens is it's trying to create respect, but it's all through the external world. And the internal world, how do you assess that? Because people can't genuinely show you whether they respect you or not. And so it backfires and it ultimately feeds into shame. It doesn't solve it. So let me go into what some kind of researchers have written about shame culture. So anthropologist Ruth Benedict popularized between a guilt culture and a shame culture. So a guilt culture, you know whether you've done good or bad because your conscience bothers you. Good or bad is determined by, does it violate love? That is what shapes morals. That's what shapes your conscience. Does this violate love or not? So guilt is an internal alarm that alerts you violated love, and you feel it individually because you've done something that violates love. So you have guilt. In a shame culture, you are good or bad by what the community says about you, by whether it honors you or excludes you. So if it honors you, you must be doing everything right. If it excludes you, you're doing something wrong. And it's based on whether or not you keep the rules, the cultural rules and norms about what is honorable. They may have nothing to do about what is healthy and loving. And so the conscience is not internal. The conscience is external. The community saying you didn't keep the rules, you're bad. And so they make you feel bad. They make you feel shame. And that then is what you think is guilt. I must have done something against love. I must be a bad person. And so it's others are your conscience because others are checking whether you keep the rules. The rules may have nothing to do with love, but if you don't keep the rules, you get made to feel bad. That's a shame culture. So, quote, a shame culture, also called honor shame culture or shame society, is the concept that in a given society, the primary device for gaining control over children and maintaining social order is the inculcation of shame and the complementary threat of ostracism. A shame society is contrasted with a guilt society in which control is maintained by creating and reinforcing the feeling of guilt, or the expectation of punishment now or in the hereafter for certain condemned behaviors. They are collectivistic societies that use the moral values of honor and shame to regulate behavior. The primary motivation in social situations is avoiding disgrace and maintaining harmonious relationships. Life is viewed through the prism of acquiring honor for the community. So honor shame cultures value hospitality, family, respect, community, generosity, purity, loyalty, and patronage. And we're going to look at all of those in a bit. Honor and shame are present in all cultures, but especially the cultures of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And then Werner Mischke says, honor shame peoples gain honor or suffer shame in two ways. Number one, through one's own actions, or through the actions of family members, the tribe, the group, and the nation. So you can do something that makes yourself look bad, or your kids can do something and that makes you look bad. And so as a result, their lives are carefully regulated to gain honor and avoid shaming events. So a couple of things that they do. The desire to be embraced and praised by the community is intense. People dread being exiled and condemned. Moral life is not built on a continuum of right and wrong. It's built on a continuum of inclusion and exclusion. In traditional shame cultures, the opposite of shame was honor or face, quote unquote. Being known as a dignified and upstanding citizen. That's the ultimate. So this creates a set of common behavior patterns. First, members of a group lavish one another with praise so that they themselves might be accepted and then praised in return. So you give praise to get praise, you give praise to get respect. Second, there are enforcers within the group who build their personal power and reputation by policing the group and condemning those who break the group code. So now you need a police to make sure everybody's keeping the rules. And as soon as somebody breaks the rules, you take it on yourself to enforce justice. And so the community can be vicious to those who don't fit in. The community can erupt in instant ridicule for anyone who stumbles. So you got to crack down quickly on rule breakers to maintain honor. Third, people are extremely anxious that their group might be condemned or denigrated by someone outside the group. So the first thing that we saw is you do something yourself that might cause you to be dishonored. Secondly, your kids might do something, or your family members might do something that make you look bad, so now you got to police your family. But third, you might have somebody outside the group that speaks badly about you, that challenges you, that says you're a fraud. Now what do? You demand instant respect and recognition for your group. You feel some moral wrong has been perpetrated when their group has been dissed or disrespected, and react with the most violent intensity. So now even outsiders can't say anything disrespectful to you. That's what begins to happen. And so the ultimate thing that pushes your buttons is disrespect. Somebody disses you. Jason Georges and Mark Baker, who spent years living in shame cultures, have written a book, and so I'm going to take 5 unwritten rules of shame culture. So the first rule is that family defines everything. So in collectivistic societies, identity is defined by the group you belong to. When two people meet, one of the first items of conversation that they would have in a shame culture is figuring out which family you're from, what's your clan, what village are you from. Honor is a shared commodity. What one person does brings honor or shame upon the entire community. So children are taught at an early age how to bring honor to the family. And people are expected to be loyal to their community, even at a personal cost. So you can see there's a fear element there that is saying you got to make the family everything, because that's what gives you your honor. It's important to note that many shame cultures criticize the individualism of the West. And they go, we're all about family. We're all about community. The West is all about individualism. And they're very critical of that. And there's much that they say I would totally agree with. But what I think you need to understand is that healthy societies, yes, there's connection, but people are able to be individuals. There's a balance. When a society is unhealthy, they focus on one aspect, either collectivism or individualism, and make it the higher priority and try to make it righteous, without saying we need both. And so often, shame-based societies are very critical of any society that would have an individualistic element, because they have exalted how much they are a unit, they're collective. What I have seen in so much of shame culture, they talk all about that they're all about family, but when I get to know the people within the family, there's not true connection. You seem to connect, but you can't talk about deep stuff. You can't be totally authentic. You have to conform. And if you don't conform, you're shunned. And so there's not the true connection that they claim. And many shame cultures who talk about how much they love family and love, and they work so hard to love family, As soon as you're not in the family, there's a different standard for love. Now I can be cruel to you. Now I can lie to you. Now I can mistreat you because you're not part of the family. And so love now isn't for everybody. It's just for people who conform to my set of rules. The second rule is social capital fixes anything. So in honor shame cultures, life is a constant quest to develop and manage an intricate network of relationships. That's social capital, having these intricate network of relationships. So the most important asset a person can have is their reputation. And so how do you get a good reputation? You get others to respect you. And how do you get them to respect you? They must know you. And once you get that reputation and lots of people share feeling that way about you, then man, you can do a lot of stuff in society. You gain power in that society. And you can solve a lot of problems. And so since problems are solved via relationships, often you can't do it yourself. You need others to help, and you need power over those people because of your reputation. So you need that social network with capital, social capital. So you accrue social capital by giving gifts to people, by helping people, by sharing meals with people. That's how you gain social capital, that respect, that reputation, that power. And then when you need to cash it in, you can, when you have a problem. And so what you begin to see is that shame culture, it sounds like great. They're all about putting energy into relationships. But when you look behind the curtain, you begin to go, whoa, they're putting energy into relationships with strings attached. They're doing it to obligate people to now owe me. That now when I'm in this situation, you have to help me. It's to gain power. It's to manipulate. It's to manage other people. That becomes what that social networking and social capital is. The third rule is that aggression restores honor. So when honor is life's most important commodity, which it is in a shame culture, then any insult to one's honor must be vigorously defended. So it requires the strongest reaction. So most honor shame cultures are antagonistic, which means they compete for their honor. When a woman is shamed, her male relatives appear weak because they didn't protect her. And so the cultural response is aggression towards the one who hurt her, or aggression towards the woman and blame her for bringing it on herself and therefore shaming the family. And it's a violent type of reaction. And so many who have been exposed to shame cultures know about honor killing. And so that's justifying killing somebody. Why? Because they brought great dishonor on the family by something they did. And the only way to restore honor is to judge that person. And by taking their life, that says we're willing to do this great act because we're honorable. And we're not going to tolerate this terrible act. And they restore the honor to the family that that person has taken away. Sadly, within many shame cultures, if a woman is raped, the man is sometimes judged, but often the woman is blamed for tempting the man. And so men aren't held accountable for their lust, for their abuse of women. The woman's always blamed. And then the woman is judged and put to death because she dishonored the family. And that is so sad. Another quote, in patriarchal societies, the activities of girls and women are closely monitored. The maintenance of a woman's virginity and sexual purity are considered to be the responsibility of male relatives. First her father and brothers, and then her husband. Victims of honor killings usually are alleged to have engaged in sexually immoral actions, ranging from openly conversing with men who are not related to them, to having sex outside of marriage, even if they are the victims of rape or sexual assault. However, a woman can be targeted for murder for a variety of other reasons, including refusing to enter into an arranged marriage or seeking a divorce or separation, even from an abusive husband. The mere suspicion that a woman has acted in a manner that could damage her family's name may trigger an attack. These assumptions are generally based on men's feelings and perceptions rather than on objective truth. The fourth rule, words define status. And so in shame-based societies, words and what you say become super important. And so they have clearly prescribed greetings for people of various social standing. So if they're of this social standing, you greet them this way. If they're of that social standing, you greet them that way. The greeting you say to an elder is different from the greeting you would say to a younger person. So words are rules for defining social hierarchy. And we're going to come back to that. Let me take that a little bit further. Do you realize the whole concept of swearing came out of shame-based societies? So narcissistic leaders wanted to feel superior to others, and so basically what they said is their proper language. And there's crass. And so who uses crass language? Crass people, unsophisticated people, people who are inferior, people who are uncultured. But we're sophisticated, we're cultured, so we're going to talk with only this language, and we're not going to use that other language. We're actually going to call it swearing, bad. And so they made now divisions about superior or inferiority based on the choice of words that people used. And then they brought the Bible in to try and support that. And so again, what I want you to see is all of that is now taking another element of human life, how we talk, making rules about that. So I end up with a superior inferiority map, and I can hide my shame. And I can walk around saying, I'm superior to you because I don't talk like you. And that went into how you dress as well, etc. The next rule, food conveys honor. So in honor, shame cultures, the people you eat with define your community and your identity. So a friend in Central Asia asked me incredulously, do Americans really eat lunch alone in a cubicle or while driving in the car like in the movies? In that culture, breaking bread imparts honor. So eating with people, that imparts honor. And who you eat with improves your status. And so eating alone is unthinkable. So let me take all of that I've said so far and just bring it to 8 characteristics of shame-based culture. So there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but I hope you're really going to get this. Number 1, group orientation, but it gets twisted to be group manipulation. And so if the community's opinion and acceptance of you is all important, your personal identity and your needs don't matter as much as what the group wants. So you now have to take authenticity and your needs and make them subservient to what the group wants. And how they then justify this is, yeah, but the group provides your core needs, so you just need to submit and be part of the group, and that's the main need that you need to have met. But really what that is you need to be loyal to the group so that we can manipulate you, so that we can control you. And so there's constant pressure to conform, but that is always put in terms of you're just being part of the group. That's what you need as family. You need to be part of a group. Secondly, public purity is a characteristic of shame societies. But what that really gets distorted into is honor is determined by externals. And so nobody wants dirt nearby. So we sweep it up and toss it out. That is why dirt and filth are sometimes metaphors for shame. But eventually those metaphors are taken literally, so that physical dirtiness connotes a social dirtiness. The Central Asian obsession with clean shoes, cars, bags illustrates this. Dirt is shameful, both metaphorically and culturally. If a person has clean shoes, they're considered clean, which is a code for honor and worth. So what you can see is that shame cultures take every aspect of life and turn it into a way to become superior to others. So they've used language, now they use cleanliness. And so they develop then a logic or a philosophy that says, see, being messy, that's inferior. Being neat and clean, that's next to godliness. That's superior. And to them, that should just make sense, that being clean is better than being somewhat messy. But then that gets taken to extreme. You can't have any dirt, anything that might be the slightest bit messy, or else you're inferior. Because now your worth is defined by external cleanliness. Third characteristic is gender roles. But that gets distorted into sexism and gender discrimination. So within a shame culture, a primary source of honor is that you observe the group expectations of you. In other words, they expect certain genders to fulfill certain roles. So you're valuable to the community when you fulfill your role, and gender roles define social expectations. So men are to advance the family honor via victory in the public sphere. Women are to avoid shame by means of modesty in the private realm. And so that's kind of the patriarchal society working itself out. But think of this. For a woman who's an introvert, whose deepest desire is just to be at home, to raise children, to care for home, that kind of society suits her perfectly. She can conform to that. But what about a woman who's flamboyant, extrovert, an entrepreneur, who thinks outside the box, who sees that her life is not about being in a home that doesn't even interest her. She wants to go out into the community and make a difference and use her business skills. All of a sudden, that woman is shameful. She is not adopting the role. And there's going to be put pressure on her to conform to that role. And if she doesn't, she will be shunned. And so as long as you maintain those roles, you're okay, but they're very gender specific. The fourth characteristic is feasting, and they celebrate how much they feast together, and that strengthens their community. But often it's distorted into ostentation, to showing off. So eating together implies community. It applies acceptance. It applies sharing possessions. But disproportionate sums of money are spent on feasting in order to impress people with how generous you are, how wealthy you are. It's all about looking good. So you feign that you're doing it to be generous when actually you're advancing yourself. The fifth characteristic, patronage. Helping other people, but it gets twisted into nepotism, into making people dependent on you. So when limited money and goods are acquired through relationships instead of jobs, patronage becomes the key economic model. So patronage is when a superior gives something physical, like food, money, housing, to somebody who's poorer than them, in exchange for something social, loyalty, obedience, praise. So you're in need, I'm going to come and give to you and take care of you, but you got to give me back loyalty, you got to give me back praise. That's how the relationships work. So patronage is how the material rich, those in superior positions, buy honor, buy status, buy power. They use their wealth to create respect, to create dependence on them, which will maintain their power and they respect, and to keep them looking good, to keep having people praising them. So it's a narcissist using their wealth to keep getting mirrors to reflect back to them how wonderful they are and to keep people inferior to them.
So I hope that what you can see here is that shame culture actually creates codependency. It creates the dynamics where codependency is seen as a healthy thing, as a virtue. But the reality is it's only healthy to those who are the narcissistic authorities. They need people who will give up their rights, who will conform, who will do what they want so that they won't be abandoned. And that's the whole basis of a shame culture. And so it actually creates codependency and then says that it's a virtue for people.
Hospitality is a huge characteristic of shame-based cultures. You have to provide hospitality to people. But that gets twisted into becoming, it's an obligation. So hosting people is patronage on a small scale. So what can begin to happen is now you're meeting the needs of people, being hospitable to people, not out of genuine love with no strings attached. Now you're doing it so they're obligated to you. Now you're doing it to look good. Now you're doing it to show how powerful and wealthy you are. And so all of that gets distorted again. Another characteristic of shame-based cultures is what is known as indirect communication. And so that can get twisted into lots of dishonesty, lots of coded language, lots of beating around the bush talk where they're actually really saying the opposite of what their words are saying. And so to understand that, the purpose of language is to maintain the higher priorities, which is communicating honor and maintaining this harmony in the community, because if there's disharmony, then there's not going to be honor. So you got to please everybody. There's got to be a fawning element where you're agreeing with people even though you disagree, where you're saying nice things even though you don't like them. So it's all about maintaining this appearance of respect, this appearance of peace, this appearance of community. That's more important than concepts of honesty and truth. So communication is more about managing social relationships than it is about exchanging information. So talking isn't about downloading information about how you're doing and the truth about life and what you want. Talking is a dance to feel out people, to figure out your next chess move so that you get what you want, so that you look good. So caution is taken to not affront other people. And so for many in the West, you go, that's lying. That's being totally dishonest. You're deliberately not saying what you mean. You're deliberately saying the opposite of what you mean. But to them, they're going, no, we're being true to maintaining social peace, social harmony. So we're doing the right thing. So an Afghan American explained, so when I invite an American to come to visit me at my house, and they say to me, oh, let me check my calendar, that is so insulting. Because in my culture, if somebody invited you to your house, you would immediately say yes. Because by saying yes, you're affirming the value of the relationship. Even though you might not be able to go, even though there's a scheduling conflict, even though you might have to cancel later, you say yes now. Because that communicates honor and the value of that relationship. So that's what we're talking about. And again, just for you to give some thought to, is just what you can see there is what begins to develop in language in shame-based cultures is lots of indirect communication, lots of talking in code, lots of saying the opposite of what you actually mean. And so it becomes a very tricky culture to figure out what people are actually saying. The next characteristic is it's event focused. So life becomes all about these wonderful events, weddings and feasts and stuff like that. But then because of the honor priority, tardiness becomes a norm. People show up late. So you say an event's supposed to start at 4 and people don't show up till 5 or 6. And so the event doesn't start at 4, it starts when everybody gets there. Now what is that all about? Two things. Identities defined by who you gather with, not the tasks that you accomplish. So you can't start something unless everybody's there, because that would be excluding them from the group, and that would be shameful. Secondly, the most important people arrive last. That's part of the shame culture. And so you got to make sure you arrive last to show how significant you are. And so again, you can see how it all gets distorted and becomes quite unhealthy in many ways. So let me go to the results of being raised in a shame culture. It's possible to live in a shame culture, but to have a family who's trying to live by a different set of values and priorities that aren't guided by shame. And so that can be so helpful to a child. So I grew up with my parents coming out of shame culture, and they were creating a healthier environment, and that protected me from a lot of complex trauma. But what you see is the child lives in two worlds. At home, they live with healthy. In the shame culture, they got to deal with a different set of rules. They got to deal with a different set of skills. They're safe at home. They're not safe in culture. They're in survival mode in culture. So they're living in two worlds, which requires two sets of tools, is what happens. And so it really depends how a child does in that culture. It really depends on how connected they are in healthy ways to their parents. If they're connected securely to their parents, then they can survive living in that culture and living with two sets of rules. But if they're not connected well to their parents, if their deep emotional needs aren't being met consistently by their parents, then often they'll get attracted to pursue the culture and be affected more by the culture. Having said that, even if they have a wonderful home, they still will be affected somewhat by the culture because they can't be authentic in the culture. They're not totally safe in the culture. They can't totally connect. So they have to adapt in order to survive in that culture, and that can have long-term effects on them. Sadly, for many people in shame-based culture, they live in a shame-based culture, but they also live in a shame-based home. Now, there may not be abuse. There may not be very obvious, terrible, traumatic things happening. But what I want you to see is there's very subtle things, conditional love, the wrong priorities of making the leader look good matters more than anything else. It's not about what is loving, it's about maintaining rules. All kinds of subtle little things that get distorted, and that is where the trauma comes from. Because the child can't be authentic. The child can't truly connect unless they conform to the rules. And so it's important then for that child to begin to understand these subtler things. There might be many aspects of the culture that you enjoyed, but it's the subtler things that came out of shame that prevented you being authentic and truly connecting. Those are the things that you need to deconstruct, and that did the damage to you. But what I have found is that many people, once they get older, and they're trying to deconstruct their shame culture, they're resistant to do that because they feel they'd be disloyal. And that's the priority within a shame culture, is you're never disloyal. You never criticize the leadership. You never say anything bad about it because that would dishonor. And so they struggle to get honest about how that culture affected them. And so it's a major roadblock that many bump into as they begin to begin the healing journey, is that you got to get honest. And it's not to say it's all terrible. It's just to say there's some unhealthy pieces here, and here's how it affected me. Other people respond by just saying, oh, it's just cultural. And every culture is different, but what they're assuming is every culture is perfect. It's just different. And that every culture does stuff differently, and there's no negative consequences to that. That's what they're trying to say in that minimization of saying it's just cultural. No, every culture's got unhealthy parts. And those unhealthy parts hurt people and prevent them from being as healthy as they could. And that's what we want people to get beyond just saying, oh, it's just the culture, to say, yes, it's a culture, but what's the unhealthy parts of that culture and how did it affect me? The next thing that people try to do, once they get to starting to deconstruct their shame culture, beginning to get healthier themselves, living by different values than shame-based values, is they now want to go back and change their culture. They now want to go back and rescue everybody in their culture. And the chances of them doing that are pretty small, because you're talking a whole culture with millions of people who've done it this way for years. And so it's important for people to do a couple things. You got to create outside of that culture a healthy surrogate family who are operating by healthy, non-shame-based values. Secondly, realize that as you change and as you get healthier, your biological family and your culture aren't going to like it. You may get opposition. You may get persecution. They may put pressure on you to come back to their culture, to submit again to it. They may try to make you to be a bad person, to be all kinds of disloyal, all kinds of things that are shaming, that making them look bad and shaming your parents. And they're going to put all kinds of guilt and shame messages on you. You're going to have to work through that. But if you stick at it and you don't give in to that pressure and you keep on growing, what probably will happen is that others within your culture are going to begin to notice that you're getting healthier, you're happier, your life is more meaningful. And they're going to be drawn to it. And they're going to maybe come and ask you about it. That's how you change a culture, is one person at a time. You change yourself, and that begins to influence a few others, and that begins to bring about true change. So that's a shame culture. You may, as I've gone through the characteristics and the rules, go, wow, that's what I grew up in. I hope it helps you see how it affected you. I hope it helps you see the subtle distortions of all the good virtues. And I hope it helps you know how to move forward in your own life. Well, that's the end of another Friday night. Thank you so much.